there is a premium on like speed versus really making sure that everybody in the team feels supported. And that was a theme across every team I've been on in general. The way that I approached program management and team operations, it was kind of confusing for folks. I'd often get the question, should I be in HR because I care about people and like how they feel about their work? And I don't think so. I believe that making sure people feel set up for success is exactly how you get the best output. So it is exactly about getting the work done. So it's not some other thing.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of learning inside companies. And joining me today is Lia Garvin, otherwise known as the Team Whisperer. So Lia is the host of the Managing Made Simple podcast and the best-selling author of The Unstoppable Team. She started her career working in tech at companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google. And we talk about some of the differences in the cultures between those two companies, which was pretty interesting. We then got into, I think, what Lia ended up doing so well at each of these companies around coaching and mentoring and setting up operating playbooks. And from there, we just start to dive into her expertise, which I find fascinating as a sort of an expert's point of view on key long-lasting principles for building sustainable, well-connected teams. So Lia shares how important language is, one of my favorite parts of the conversation, and how that can color a conversation and provide some tips on reframing from why to what. She also shares her top coaching questions, which I'm sure all of you will enjoy hearing. There's a great story that she shares around a failure point and the lessons that she learned from that. We get into a little bit of the 5 dysfunctions of a team and Lia's take on that. And at the end, she actually is very generous to start to kind of lay out what her operations playbook is, which is a product that you can buy from her off her website. And yeah, lots of great stuff in between this. This was a really good conversation. And I walked away with some very practical things that I would do differently with my team. And I hope you do too. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Lia Garvin. Lia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So I was on your podcast recently, which was a very fun conversation, our first. So this is round 2. And you started things off with a great question that I think you do on all your episodes. And I'm going to do a little tweak on that for your first question as the guest today. Awesome. I want to know, so you spent some time in various roles at Microsoft, at Apple, at Google, a few other companies in between. Those ones obviously stand out. And I think most of your time was at Google, right? Yeah. Most before you started to do your own thing. I'm curious, like, what your reflections are on the differences between the team cultures that you were part of in those companies. And so you don't have to, opine on the whole company culture or whatever, but just the team culture and what was different about the way each of those teams went about their work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's interesting because I know even Microsoft, where I started my career in tech, now this would be 11 years ago, is so different now. And so it's funny because the team cultures are always evolving. And I think what was interesting was actually when I joined Microsoft was right when Satya Nadella took the helm, and even the shifts, in those 3 years that I was there were pretty dramatic. But I think, one thing I think I would say more than differences is really the similarities that I started to see. And that actually has informed the work that I do of like recognizing what are common themes on teams and where do people get stuck. And I think especially in engineering organizations, there's of which Apple is also, I think it's viewed often as a design organization, but they're making, technical products. So like these all 3 were very engineering centered organizations. And I think from the team aspect, there can be a belief that like we just got to focus on the work to move faster. It's all about the work and the call everything a P0 and we'll just get more done and like just keep going with that.
Yeah.
And I think there's not in many situations wasn't enough focus on the team. And I don't just mean team culture here. And I think this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently is like what do we even mean when we think about team? I think a lot of times we think it's about like happy hours and morale and these
Right.
kind of like rah kind of things. But the way that I look at team, it maybe includes those, but it's like how we gel, how we get work done, how we lean on each other, how we, differentiate and delineate roles and responsibilities, how we collaborate. And so I think there's a belief across many companies in tech that like put a bunch of smart people in a room together and they figure out how to work effectively. It's like literally not.
That's not the way it
Zero.
works. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. And
It,
so, yeah.
yeah. You need some explicit calling out of how we do
Yeah.
things around here, right?
Right.
That's essentially, that's culture, right? How we do things
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm a big believer in that. Was your experience that was already in place, like they were doing that well, or was that something that these teams had to learn how to do well?
It really depended on the specific. I mean, I think w- there's I think fortunately in some of these large organizations, like Apple, Google, Microsoft, I think Meta as well, like there is like a lot of investment in, manager training and, and like having kind of sort of some things available for folks. Google had the infamous study on psychological safety. And so I think there's an awareness of it where you don't feel like you're, talking about, hey, we need to make sure, you're not talking to avoid when you talk about some of these things. But I do think there is a premium on like speed versus really making sure that everybody in the team feels supported. And that was a theme across every team I've been on in general. And it as a result, the way that I approached program management and team operations it was kind of confusing for folks. I'd often get the question, should I be in HR because I care about people and like
Yeah.
how they feel about their work?
Yeah.
And I don't think so. HR actually has a very different role than that. And I think, I believe that making sure people feel set up for success is exactly how you get the best output. So it is exactly about, getting,
Yeah.
it is about getting the work done. So
Yeah.
it's not some other thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you want the best out of a team, you got to get everyone showing up as their
Yeah,
best selves. Yeah.
exactly.
So was that actually like, did you run into, like, was that counter to the narrative in some of these places?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't say like actively counter to the narrative, but I would say, um, like there's not, there wasn't, and I don't think in general today a lot of people on a product team, in which that's what I was in. I was deep in
Right.
product teams that are
Right.
saying like, wait, let's take a step back. Are we really like, what are the mechanisms for giving feedback, for talking about assessing trade-offs, for making sure there's not confusion, for these really sort of kind of things about the fabric of how the team interacts. I think I don't think that's talked about enough at all. And that was really something that I kept feeling like I had to keep bringing it up. And it's wasn't always like, oh yeah, of course. It was kind of like, well, yeah, but we could just do this, and
Yeah.
and so I felt there was a tension there. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, so I want to go back to, you mentioned like manager training, and I'm going to assume, because of what you just said now, that this kind of stuff wasn't trained, it wasn't really taught, that you had to kind of figure it out as you went along. What was, first of all, like what was your experience again across those three, or feel free to like just pick one that you're the
Yeah.
most time at, but what was the training like? What did it look like? What did it address? And then what were the gaps?
Yeah. So at Google specifically, they have a lot of training for managers, for example, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's an example of, when you become a new manager, there's a whole program for that, which is really helpful. There's sort of, manager kind of fundamentals that are important to focus on. I developed a lot of manager trainings in my work, and so I was
Mm-hmm.
running some manager development programs for the teams that I was on, and I think what's awesome is that they have that available. I think the biggest gap in any company, Google, Microsoft, Apple, any company, is that most trainings like that are optional. And you have
Yeah.
the bad managers opt out. They're like, "Oh, I'm good. I don't need this." Right. And
Yeah.
so that's the biggest gap, I would say. And it's not exclusive to Google, but I would run trainings and I would see like, oh, I really,
Mm.
like I know
Mm.
there's some folks that really should have got a nudge to show up. And you have
Yeah.
people that are really, really passionate and want to be great managers. They're at the front of the class raising their hand. And that's awesome. But I wish there was more support for, how do you get everybody, especially the people that are struggling? Um, how do you balance like in a non-threatening, punitive way where they're not going to reject it anyway? I know that's a really
Yeah.
challenging thing with trainings. And I think investing what companies could do more, whether it's, any of the ones that I was at or anyone else, is like investing in multiple solutions, so
Mm.
you have maybe a group training, maybe there's some group coaching, or like team
Yeah.
training maybe is the biggest one, maybe there's some group coaching,
Yeah.
maybe there's some one-on-one, really giving some multiple avenues so that people have a variety of places to plug in and to be nudged into it. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up coaching because that's something that comes up a lot in our world, and
yeah,
there's no, mm, you could create the best training on the planet, right?
yeah,
And you get in, and maybe even everyone attends it, but if it's not reinforced on an ongoing
right,
basis by
right.
coaches, right? So what was that experience like for you? Like, where did you see, like, what are the good and the bad that you've seen with coaching?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think one drawback with coaching, I think, in the corporate world is that it's often given to only people at a certain seniority. When it's like it's assumed you've gotten this high up
Mm,
wing in it, and now you
yeah,
get a coach
executive
when you're,
coaching. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and that I think is backwards, right? I think we should have coaching and mentoring for everybody at any level of the organization, because that's how you do get to the next level.
Mm,
So I think that's one thing, and I think having um one of the focuses of the manager trainings that I developed within Google was about how the manager can play a role of coach, how they
mm,
understand what that looks like, really learning about listening and open-ended questions and not problem solving. And this is also a lot of what I bring into my manager trainings that I do now as a consultant and with my podcast. And
mm.
um, is really, in the absence of having a coach available for everyone, because maybe you don't have the internal budget or the coaches
Yeah.
internally, that we can really play a role of that as managers. First and foremost, by avoiding problem solving and telling people how to do
Mm,
everything. Like that's
yeah.
like, if you take one thing away, that's the one.
Yeah.
And then really using open-ended questions. I think
Yeah.
when I got my coaching certification, it became clear, the little things like how language can really sort of color the way a conversation goes. For example,
Mm, mm.
saying, "Why did that happen?" There's like no positive outcome that comes from asking
No,
someone, so why. It's
that's
just like,
inviting judgments, right? Like,
exactly.
yeah.
It's 100% judgment and defenses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sharing like quickest life hack, right? You reframe from why to what
Mm,
always. That's
mhm.
such a simple thing they can do. Or, when someone comes to you with a challenge, ask, okay, what does that mean to you? So someone might say, I'm really overwhelmed. And you think, oh my God, that means they have too much work on their plate. They're not going to deliver. We have this whole story. And
Mm,
if we said, oh, so what does overwhelmed mean to you? How is that showing up? They
mm.
might literally say, oh my God, I love my job. Everything's going well, but my roommate just moved out. And now I have this whole stress of finding someone. Has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the job. And you
Totally.
had all these assumptions,
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, and this, I was just at a conference this week, and one of the talks was about like the top coaching questions. I'm wondering if there's any other ones that you come up with. You just know like
Yeah.
this question is just so powerful. Anything come to mind for you?
I mean, a biggie that people avoid is like, what might be going on with that other person?
Mm,
Like, I think a
yeah,
lot of
because
times, yeah.
it's
So,
uncomfortable to talk about.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Or someone comes to us, this person did this to me. They're out to get me. I don't know why this is happening. They were this. And we might say, okay, well, like, we don't have to agree with it, but like, what else might be here with the other person?
Mm,
And even asking our team members to think that, and that kind of assuming positive intent sort of direction, like, um, if someone sends an abrupt email, what else might be possible? They might be
Yeah.
rushing to get out the door to get to their kid's soccer game. They might
Hmm.
be looking at their phone at a stoplight. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons, and to help our team members sort of, not just jump into like sort of the negative, someone's out to get me or someone doesn't,
Mm.
they did this on purpose.
Yeah.
That can be a really helpful one.
Yeah. One that came up in this talk, which
Yeah.
I think is so great, is how's this? This goes, you ask the person, like, especially after they've done something well, it's like, what makes you so good at this?
Ooh, I love
Right?
that. I
Right? And like
love
get them
that.
to like unpack that, because that
Yeah.
is like there's a whole study around, like we talked about motivation earlier. Like if someone can connect with that feeling of like, oh, I'm actually good at this and this is
Yes.
why, that actually gives motivation to go and
Yes.
tackle harder problems.
I
Yeah.
love that. And one piece of that that's so powerful is the coaching skill of acknowledgement. So of naming a
Yeah.
quality you see in someone. And with that question, it's not like, I think you're kind of good at this. You are
Yeah.
naming it and claiming it and like
Yeah.
letting that person own that.
Love
Yeah.
that. Love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so going back to your role, and I'm gonna shift things into kind of then the, I guess, the gap that you saw and why you went in to do your own thing,
Yeah.
and what you're doing now. But to spend a little bit more time in that role, like what was, can you think of a time that you had a like a lesson learned, right? You made a mistake, you like something went wrong, a failure point, like anything that come to mind now that you can tell us about, and just unpack a little bit like what you've learned from that.
Yeah. I mean, in one of the roles I had, it's interesting because I had really great success getting a design team onboarded onto tracking their work in one of my roles.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I joined the team and we were like 6 or 8 weeks out from having this huge, huge milestone. And the design team I was working with wasn't tracking their work at all. And so this created a huge, you know, rift between design and engineering because engineering thought design was just like floating on an island doing nothing. And design was doing a lot, but we had no way to know how far off we were.
Mm,
So I sat down with the team and I got to know everyone. I learned about, well, how are they tracking their work and what are they working on? And, really painted the picture of the why of by tracking our work, we not only can, you know, understand how far off we are about showcasing this thing to the world. We had this big event coming up, but we can also make sure we're not being left out of the process because engineering would just move forward without them. And
mm,
I got the team on board really quickly. I set them up in the system and it was awesome. And
mm,
so in a subsequent role, it was, again, I was tasked with, in another company, I was tasked with getting a whole design studio on board on tracking their work.
mm,
And I followed a similar process. I talked to designers. I got to understand where they were getting stuck, and they were all really, really wanted to do it.
mm,
Then when I, brought this to my counterparts who were also doing, program management oversight of their own individual projects, they all objected to it. And,
mm,
and they were saying, do we need this? We don't want to be too heavy handed. There was all these opinions on how to do it. And trying to drive this project for almost a year, we had made zero progress.
mm,
And it was frustrating, and it became a theme actually I saw happen again with things like work tracking was um the people that the system isn't for are debating the worth of it. And it's
mm,
like
mm.
we just found out from the team they want this, like why the hell is this even up for debate?
Yeah.
And this was something that was a really both frustrating and really was a huge lesson around, how do you uh build alignment when it's not the people that are arguing it's nothing, they don't believe anything is in it for them. And like how do you kind of um and I think I struggled with figuring that out at the time. I think since then I have a lot more strategies around um and next time I would bring my counterparts to those conversations with designers, for example. I
Mm,
would paint a better picture of the time savings that we could capture from that. I
mm,
would pilot with a small team and show the benefits, right? I would have done that. But at the time it was um we every meeting we would just debate, should we do this or not? And it felt like, well, like screw it, I don't even need to do this.
yeah.
But now that kind of learning does inform now, helping teams stand up a task tracking system.
Yeah. Yeah, this is huge. It's a change initiatives, right? Like getting teams
Yeah.
aligned on
Yeah.
change, right? And so I think there's some great lessons there around like early communication, over communication, like
Yeah.
sharing wins, um, yeah,
Yeah.
mapping out milestones, all that kind of stuff. This is a big part of our work. A lot of people listen to the show are working in this kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
Basically
Yeah.
change initiatives. So it made me think as well. What other, you get the five dysfunctions of a team thing. Like what are some of the things you've seen in your experience that trip teams up? What are like the common issues that like make a team struggle?
So you've named one of my favorite books of all time because
I
it
thought so.
calls out,
Yeah.
you guessed it, my number one, the biggest thing. I think there's one dysfunction of a team that I would say creates the rest, and
Mhm.
that is an absence of accountability.
Yes, the
And
blame game. Yeah,
right.
totally.
I mean, it's like
Yeah.
there, because that's the root of everything. That creates the distress, that creates everything else. So,
Mm.
and I even see the absence of accountability to be, or sorry, when you look at something like psychological safety as a foundation of an effective team, I see actually accountability to be like the real foundation. Because if you
Mm.
don't have accountability, if you don't know what are the where are the places that I can, voice concern, or like what am I even working on? Like what is this all about? Or who
Mm.
do I go to for what? When you don't have that, how are you supposed to feel safe to say anything?
Mm.
And I think there's a really missing piece. And like, sorry, Amy Edmondson, like I think there's like a really big
It's,
missing piece to the
there's a
psychological
root cause.
safety.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
root cause.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we not feeling that? Because I don't know. I'm not like, I don't know if what happens one day is going to be the same the next day. So how
Yeah.
can I feel safe?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think when you're in a team where, signals of lack of accountability are, you meet on something, you make a decision, it's all great in the meeting. And then 5 seconds later, you leave the meeting, everyone's like, man, should we do that? Or like,
Yeah.
people agree to deadlines they're not going to meet, which is
Yeah.
huge issue in the software space because, deadlines can change relatively easily. And there's a lot of pressure to say yes and have 35 P0s, which is like supposed to be most important thing. But how do you have 35 of them if like you have a
Yeah.
5% team?
Yeah.
So yeah. And so you
Yeah.
get this culture where you're kind of like, yeah, you're supposed to say yes. We're just going to like appease this kind of one moment. And then we
Yeah.
kind of know we don't have to do it.
Mm.
That is something that I think is
Mm.
pretty symptomatic in many corporate environments and many kind of industries that um, I really believe it's the biggest thing that breaks a team down.
Yeah.
Because even with a small business, if you can get your team members feeling accountable to growing the business, to being a part of it, you then foster an ownership mindset where they
Yeah.
show up proactively and they're thinking of ideas to grow the business. They're not coming to you with problems. They're taking action. Now you can
Yeah.
literally like scale to no limits.
Yeah.
So it's both the biggest problem and the biggest opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well said. I love that. It's this is similar to the adaptive intelligence stuff that I talk about. We talked about on your show a little bit, and that
Yeah.
it's a kind of like an entrepreneurial mindset. It's that a thing to
Yeah.
like, first of all, yeah, 100% take responsibility, and then to go learn, adapt, invent, like keep iterating, all of that. But getting people to do that, I've also found it's really tough, and I think there's almost like a societal thing as well. Like a lot of
Hmm.
we have grown up in a comfort crisis. Like there's a great
Yeah.
book on this. I think Michael, I forget his name now. Comfort crisis, and it's like we all are kind of a victim to this. We've just
Yeah.
had things made easier for us, and
Yeah.
yeah, because of that, we're like, well, it's not my problem. Someone else will
Yeah.
take care of this.
It's so true. And I think with distributed teams and distributed responsibilities, it's a great thing in theory, but
Mm.
you don't have individual owners and no one's butts on the line really for any stage
Right.
in the process. Even if you name people, there's always like, well, this other thing was also a part of it. And it becomes really hard to, and again, you don't want to blame, but it's hard to sort of follow where the breakdown happened.
Mm.
And it becomes really easy to just be like, well, I didn't do anything. And so I think that's a huge role in it, which is why it can be easier to tackle in a smaller business where
Yeah.
roles are more delineated and
Yeah.
you don't have different departments that are all kind of working on similar things.
Yeah. This makes me think of a part of your work that I'm very fascinated and selfishly, because I think about this all the time for my business. Coming in, and you have some great testimonials on your website where people talk about the impact that you make around getting everyone on the team kind of like aligned and working on the things that grow the business. So like they
Yeah.
might be like in a design role, or like, a writing, like script. We have script writers, and I'm just picturing, like, if I could get my learning architects and script writers and creative engineers to be also thinking about, I'm not asking them to create marketing content for me, but like,
Right.
what else could they be doing to just align with the things that move the business forward and grow
Yeah.
the business? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the single biggest opportunity, I think, for any business owner, is connecting the dots between like the company priorities, which is like the growing the business piece, the individual expectations, and then how you're evaluating them. So the performance.
Mm.
And I see that trifecta as being such an opportunity to create this ownership mindset. And for a specific example, like if you say, okay, we have this, revenue goal of, let's say we want to double our revenue in 2024. So that's kind of this North Star.
Mm-hmm.
And then look across all of the jobs that you have in your team, or all the teams you have in your company, and start to just like map out, well, what are examples of how every single person, so the designer, someone
Mm.
that does, BD, someone that does whatever, every role, and start to give examples. And to give an example from, like I work with some med spas, like a med spa. Okay. One example is like the person that cleans the machines after someone uses them. How does
Yeah.
that person support growing the
Yeah.
business? Well, that person, when a client walks in the door, they expect to have this premium experience. That's what's going to keep them coming back.
Mm.
And when they walk into a room and it's messy or something's broken, they're not going to come back. And so the person that makes sure that everything is spotless and working and set up, and the room, is well lit and all that, that person plays a huge role in retaining
Yeah.
clients, right?
Yeah.
And when you paint that picture for someone, not only do they take more pride in their work, right? I think you can really help transform a role that someone may feel like is sort of like tactical, or, like who cares, like someone that doesn't maybe see themselves in the growing the
Yeah.
business. You can make that shift in them, but then you can also ask them, so what are other ways in which you could see, growing the
Mm.
business? And then
Yeah.
you've gotten them bought in. And so that's how you get them like to be aware of it. Then that becomes the expectations. And then the biggest piece is evaluating them on that. I think it often falls apart where we have the priorities, we have expectations, but they're like performance is based on something that's incongruent to that. So it's based on
Mm.
something else.
Mm.
And why the hell am I going to help grow the business when I am evaluated on if I did this one task?
Yeah.
Like you got to count that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Totally. That's
you
so
know,
true. Yeah.
and it was a huge problem in the corporate world. And uh, when I worked on DEI, I mean, it
Mm.
was like everybody was supposed to help, make a more inclusive culture and be making the place better and be actively. But then when you got to performance review, that wasn't even on there. It wasn't. It was like,
Mm.
well,
Yeah.
that's a nice to have, but what about the rest of your job? Why are people going to help these culture building initiatives or build a more inclusive team if it sort of works against you?
Mm.
Like, so this became a real mission of mine when I was working that space and seeing that big disconnect.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the exact quotes quickly while we talk about it, from Charlie Munger, but it's about incentives, right? He says,
Yeah.
"Yeah, show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." Right? Like
Yes, exactly.
that's it. Like it's so true,
Yeah.
and I love this framework: priorities, expectations, and then evaluation.
Yeah.
Yeah, like get
Yeah.
those. You got to get all three of those, and
Yeah.
most people forget about the last one. Yeah.
Exactly.
This also reminds me of kind of what something I talk about a lot, which is a shared vision, right? Like having
Yeah.
everyone like focused
Yeah.
on the same thing and moving in the same direction. And it also ties back to what we talked about earlier about being explicit and bringing these things to the surface. So this thing of having that sort of communicating priorities, communicating expectations, and the evaluation piece is doing that. It's making
Yeah.
the vision explicit and making it something that you can get behind, like fully committed
Yeah.
to, as opposed to just
Exactly.
complying with. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, I think something else that's so important is we don't just have a vision for the sake of it, and we don't do, and a vision is intentionally aspirational and maybe somewhat, you know,
Inspiring,
ethereal, but
or yeah,
yeah, inspiring or not so concrete.
right,
we
right,
have to we have to make it concrete,
mm,
otherwise it's like, well, whatever, I can't
yeah,
save the world myself, I don't know how
yeah,
to do this, right?
yeah,
So that's where, like, vision is, that translation into priorities, into goals, into expectations
mm,
becomes so important.
yeah,
Otherwise, um you have to have a vision and values. I think that governs what you prioritize and how you make decisions, but
mm,
there was a big step that we can miss by not making it more concrete,
mm,
or hoping our team members make it more concrete, because a lot of times they're going to make assumptions that weren't what you had in mind.
yeah.
And that's just the nature of the beast.
Totally, totally. Yeah. I love that. This is something I'm definitely going to use more explicitly. I think we do this a little bit, but just like now, like giving it a framework like this makes it a lot more concrete, like you say.
Yeah.
So this is great. So okay, so I want to now shift to, so a lot of people who listen to the show are also like so many of the people that I talk to that listen to the show want to like do their own thing, like start a side hustle, start their own thing. Like
Yeah.
it's a lot of people's minds. So I know a lot of them are probably wondering how you decided to like leave Google and like a career in tech and in product management and all that, and do your own thing. Like what gave you the idea to do it? What gave you the motivation or confidence to do it? Like what made
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think, over the years, I really wanted to approach like how work got done on teams a little bit differently, like you really unpacked with me in the start of our conversation.
Mm,
And for it was a big leap. I liked my job at Google, and I had a great community there, and it was, a good job. And I think what sort of clicked in for me was really, a passion for bringing the ideas I had to more people that don't really have support in these areas.
mm,
And that's really why a large part of the work that I do is with smaller businesses, because um, like I mentioned, there is manager trainings in large companies, there's some
mm,
infrastructure for this, but for someone that starts their own business or turns a side hustle into a bigger thing, or has a side hustle that's a business, and then they started hiring folks, they
mm-hmm.
maybe don't identify as a manager. And there's actually
Yeah.
a lot of really simple things that they can do to feel better about it, for their teams to feel better. And so I knew there was more impact that I could create. And
Mm,
so I took a leap, and it was think it was way, the as a type A, kind of like predictability person, like
mm,
the fact that I was like not anxious every day showed that it was the right move, because I
mm-hmm.
was really
That's a good
instantly
sign.
felt like in my flow.
Yeah.
And so I'd say to folks that are thinking about doing it, it was started as a side hustle, as an idea for a long
Uh-huh.
time. So I think that makes sense to figure out kind of like your financials and what you need. And if
Yeah.
you're a single person versus the,
Mm,
like partnered or with kids, the situation looks very different for
right.
everybody.
Right.
But um, I think if you're passionate about something, a little bit of that like leap in the net will appear is an important thing to do, and not get stuck in all the logistics. I mean, there's some planning you can do, but not worrying about having to have it all figured out. And that's from someone
Yeah.
that loves having shit figured out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like,
So,
it's
yeah.
like, but because, it starts to kind of, when you get out there and you're doing it and focusing on it, sort of stuff starts to come together. You put yourself out there in different ways. Like I've joined a lot of entrepreneur communities, or joined like masterminds. I never even heard of what that was before. And
Yeah.
really talk to people, get feedback. That's kind of how you bring it to life. And the work that I do now, which is supporting small businesses really figure out and streamline their team operations and feel like set up for success, for really how to translate that vision
Mm,
into action, right?
mm,
Like the stuff we've been talking about, that I would not have really sort of thought about how that worked until I took a step back and thought,
yeah.
where can I add a lot of value? What are people needing? And
Mm,
it was from talking to more, to small business owners, and finding people
yeah.
saying like, hey, the stuff you talk about, like, we need this. Could you help us? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can,
And that wasn't in the plan initially. Like you weren't setting out to go
No.
and, yeah, exactly. that's the key point. I think, like you said, like you got to listen
Yeah.
to the market and follow the
Yeah.
opportunity, and like it. But the only way to do that is to start.
Yeah, right. Because
Yeah.
you're just assuming,
Right.
and there's a different level of investment when you're doing it or you're kind of like
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
again, I know everyone like there's a lot of financial considerations and everything
Right.
like that to be thinking through, of course.
Right. Right.
And there's also I think ways to really start to suss out like what are you so motivated by that it's worth it to you to take some risk.
Yeah.
um like I got like way overly emotionally invested in like people like working in a way that was like not making sense, that was
Mm.
like drove me like
Mm.
so,
Yeah.
and it was like I have to fix this, I cannot stand
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And because the teams are suffering, like at the core I want to make it easier for people to get work done. I
Yeah.
want people to feel better about their work.
Yeah.
So that looks like supporting business owners, and it's also, it's in service of both the business owner and the employees,
Right.
because people don't have to hate their jobs. They don't have to
Right.
feel like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So, and that motivation, I think the other thing to share is that motivation can manifest in different ways. So I can do the ops playbook program where I support business owners. I can do corporate manager trainings like I do. I can,
Mm-hmm.
um, coach one-on-one. I could do something else. Like when you have that why and that figure
Yeah.
out really clearly what that passion is,
Yeah.
then success can take many shapes. And it's
Yeah.
not like, oh, I failed, I should just quit and call my old
Right.
boss and tell her like,
Right.
take me back.
Yeah, you gotta try something. Yeah, and that's freeing. Like there are lots of different ways to. It sounds flippant to say this because it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, but there are a lot of different ways to get to do what you are passionate about
Yeah.
doing and get paid
Yeah.
for it. I didn't know that either until I started doing it and then realized, oh,
Right.
people will pay for
Exactly.
this and they'll pay for that. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you keep iterating. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so to close things off, I think I'd love to just this is also like kind of a selfish question as well. But I think a lot of people listening, whether they are a small business owner or whether they're working in a big company on a team, I think would love to know how you do your work, right? So what are like the first things you look at? Like what does the ops playbook kind of look like in a nutshell?
Yeah. Yeah. So the ops playbook is has three pieces. I do a deep dive with the business owner to understand really where they are across these six dimensions that really are what I see as the building blocks of an effective team from my experience, and where I see kind of the biggest breakdowns in communication happen. And so in that deep dive, we talk about onboarding, we talk about priorities, which we talked about, expectations, right? Performance. We talk about that trifecta,
Mm-hmm.
work tracking, and then delegating. And then phase two is I create this playbook for your business, customize, which maps out, some lightweight processes or working norms or what we want to do across these six dimensions.
Mm.
And then I present that to the team so that we really land. This is so important that this thing is for them, for their
Yeah.
success. It's not a rule book. It's not we're trying to whip everyone to shape. This is like, hey, let's make things more clear. Let's make
Mm.
sure you're set up for success. And then I support implementing that for 3 months. So once we have the ops playbook communicated, I do one-on-one coaching. I can do manager training. We can build out, if we want to stand up a task tracking system. So I support kind of as a fractional
Mm.
COO or chief of staff for 3
Mm.
months to really roll up my sleeves and dive into wherever the business really needs it.
That's awesome. And what are what makes like what separates clients that are successful from those that aren't? Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think really, initially I debated, should I just do the playbook and the implementation? It's like, I absolutely have to do the implementation,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of times work with someone, we get some cool ideas or we go to a mastermind or we go to some program, and then we have this like PDF we don't use.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so
Totally.
I think that's one big one, is really leaning on that 3 months to like, say, hey, how can I keep meeting with that business owner to make sure they really feel like they're owning the messaging here?
Mm.
Who on the team really is going to be taking the different pieces? What can we set up that's just self-sustaining? Like, overhauling meetings, you can get all that set up and just like no one has to even be managing it anymore.
Mm.
Right. So I think really, leaning on that implementation and using that time, and not kind of like letting it go by where you didn't maximize it,
Mm.
because I think from having a background both in team operations and in coaching and help supporting performance reviewing and standing up testing. Like I have like a pretty wide set of abilities to be able to help out. So why not use it?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Lia, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of share some of this wisdom. There's so many things that overlap in terms of like what we do in terms of the outcome, and I think we both approach it in different ways. So our conversation will definitely continue. Where can folks who listen learn more from you, connect with you?
Yeah. So first, thank you so much for having me on. I love this conversation just as I did on my show. I would say check out Managing Made Simple. That's my podcast, which offers a lot of strategies in depth around really all the stuff we talked about today. I dive into those sections of the ops playbook, this performance expectations, priorities trifecta. So it's a great place if you're managing folks. And again, if you're a business owner with team members, you are a manager. Surprise. So it's a great place to get some tips and tools. Otherwise, on my website, liagarvin.com, that's where you can learn about the ops playbook and all the work that I do. And one resource I love to share is liagarvin.com/scorecard. It's a checklist of 10 things you can do every week to show up better for your team as a manager. So it's just some reminders, like giving feedback and recognition, and just to kind of help you feel like, wait, what am I supposed to do? Like, I know, I know what I can put into practice.
Yeah, that's awesome. And any leader out there who thinks that they know it all is like destined for failure, in my opinion. It's what you don't know is more important than what you do. So
exactly,
having a scorecard, these kind of things are so useful to just show those blind spots, and if you pick up one thing, it's super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, Lia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you too. Excited for more collaborations.
Oh yeah. Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.